We received a lot of great comments from our Brandywine and Trenton wargame episodes on how awesome the miniatures and the armies looked, and in today's video you're going to see how I painted some of those 10mm figures. The models that you saw us use in these wargames were from Pendraken. The guys at the club are loving the 10mm scale, and the question I'm going to answer in this video is how you can paint them efficiently and in a way that really makes them pop. Now, before we get started, I do want to offer two important caveats. Number one, the method that I'm going to show you today is my method for painting 10mm figures. It is by no means the only method. There are other ways you could go about this. The technique that I use does not involve any inks or washes. My second disclaimer is that I've never considered myself to be a pro painter by any means. I paint well, but I'm a wargamer first and a painter second. So my goal is always to get minis on the table efficiently, not to win any awards for my painting abilities. Alright, now let's up the ante on the beginner-friendly nature of this painting tutorial by accepting a challenge that was sent to us by the Army painter. How many different colors does it really take to paint an AWI army? Well, in this video, I am only going to be using the colors that come in this Army Painter starter box. There are 9 different colors provided in this starter set, along with a strong tone wash, and there's a fine detail paintbrush. Obviously, Army Painter does make a ton of additional colors, but honestly, I think you'll be surprised how far we can go with just these basic options. Alright, let's get to it. I'm going to start by sorting my figures and cleaning off the flash. One of the reasons I really do love Pendraken is that the figures themselves are really clean out of the bag. Sometimes you do have to clean up the bottom of a base, but that is usually about it. Today I'm going to be painting some British infantry, but the techniques that we use here are the exact same ones that I use to paint figures in other eras of history. The first thing that I like to do is glue my figures onto tongue depressors. You can use popsicle sticks or even strips of heavy cardboard, but I like the space that you get on a wider tongue depressor. So just go ahead, add dabs of Elmer's glue, and let these guys dry for a few hours. Now, once your miniatures are dry on the tongue depressor, it is time to start painting. And I like to begin by priming my miniatures in black. There are different schools of thought on this. There are painters out there who will prime in white or in gray, but I am very much in the camp of using black primer. And later on in this video, I will explain why. As you can see here, I'm also a big believer in priming by brush and not by spray paint. I like the manual control of the brush, and I do think it leads to a nicer product in the end. There's no risk of overspray or losing any detail on your figures. This often will take 2 coats, and when the black paint is dry, I then like to use a darker mid-tone gray to dry brush the figures. Now, the Army Painter starter box does not include a dark gray color. But if you ever took elementary school art class, you should probably be savvy enough to figure out a solution for that. So I'm just going to mix a drop or two of white into black to create my own gray. And I'm using the leftover plastic tray from the box set as my mixing palette. For dry brushing, I like to use a wide, flat brush. And during this dry brush step, what you're going to do is highlight all of the raised details on the figures to help you see what you need to paint next. From here, I'm going to start painting the red jackets. So we're going to use Army Painter Pure Red for our British redcoats. I know there are painters who do prefer to start with faces and hands. That's called painting from the inside out. It's a fine idea, just not how I do it personally. The order in which you're going to do your base colors really isn't all that critical, so do whatever's comfortable. Second, I'm going to move on to white. Now, for the British, there's a lot of white that we need to catch, including the pants and all of the chest straps. Next, we're going to do leather brown for musket stocks and any other wooden poles like this artillery crewman's equipment. Now we come to the flesh, and I'm going to be using barbarian flesh. At 10mm scale, this really is just a matter of a couple of small dabs on the hands and faces. The fine detail brush that you get in the Army Painter starter set is perfect for this. For this particular regiment, I've chosen ultramarine blue for the cuffs and collars. British regiments did use a number of different colors historically. Green, white, yellow, those would all have been viable uniform options, but I've gone with blue this time. Finally, we're going to paint our bayonets and swords using plate mail metal. It's a metallic silver. These guys are looking pretty good at this step, but I have missed one detail I'd like to go back and catch. It's the white edge trim on the tops of the hats. That is fairly quick work, and you can see my finished troops here. At the start of the video, I mentioned that I do not use any inks or washes on my 10mm figures. Now, there are guys who do, including guys at my own club, but we're not going to use any here. And I say here because if you saw my 28mm Viking demo for new painters, then you know that I used 2 Citadel washes for that project. And the Army Painter starter box does include a nice brown wash called Strong Tone, so I could have used it today, but painting 28mm is actually quite different from 10mm. I think as you go down in scale on smaller miniatures, it becomes more and more important to use brighter tones to help those tiny figures pop. I have tried using washes on my 10 and even 6mm troops before, but I think it makes them look a little bit dull and dirty. I'm much happier with the brighter look of figures without a wash. And this brings us full circle to why you prime your base coat in black. You can see those sharp lines and that contrast between the black and all of the other colors that I've applied. So now when you're done painting these guys, all you need to do is twist the tongue depressor to loosen the glue and just take a hobby knife and gently pry or pop the models off the stick. I then super glue my figures down to their bases. Here I'm using 1-inch square bases for our live free or die rules, but you can use whatever basing you like. Alright, the figures are painted and ready to go, so let's talk for just a minute about basing. The guys that I painted today are ones that I'm going to be using for our Trenton wargame with a winter look. Most of the figures that I've already done so far are actually summer bases for our Brandywine episode. For the Brandywine figures, I used a brown railroad ballast and glued patches of static grass on top. This was very simple to do, but today for our winter look, I'm going to start by painting the bases tan. I use very cheap, like $1 craft paints for my basing instead of my more expensive miniature paints like the Army Painter, Citadel, or Vallejo. My winter bases are flocked with some brown static grass and then dry brushed white to simulate frost or light snow. I like to then apply a watered down caulk with a toothpick to create patches of heavier snowdrifts. So there you have it, guys. Our club painted a huge number of these Pendraken models for our Brandywine episode. We painted even more for Trenton, and I did my fair share of them using the block painting technique that you saw in this video. No washes, no inks, no fancy methods involved here. I own a lot of 10mm miniatures for various periods, but I'm really happy with how my AWI Pendraken armies turned out. I've got Americans and British now in both winter and summer kits. A big thank you to Leon at Pendraken and to the team at the Army Painter for sending us this starter paint set. This little box had more than enough paints for me to paint an entire British army. Now, if you missed the 28mm Viking painting tutorial, you can click over here to check that out next.